Our next speaker is Denise Straiges CCH RSHom. Denise is the Director and Head of Clinical Affairs at the Center for Homeopathic Education in New York City, a subsidiary of CHE London, which happens to be the largest homeopathic college in the UK. She is a homeopathic practitioner, a health supportive chef, international lecturer, a writer, and a motivational speaker. Her integrative practice model, called Well for Good, uses a multi-level approach based on classical homeopathy, food, movement, and meditation. Denise Straiges. While she's coming up on stage, just wanted to point out, I know the audience is probably getting a little bit hungry, so we have a very nice appetizer and refreshment break coming up very soon. We're going to have Denise, and we're going to have one more presentation, and then there's a nice break and appetizer, so just a few minutes more. Thank you.
Hello. I know you're hungry, so I tried to time my talk to 13 minutes. We'll see how that goes. I'm really happy to be here because one of the things that often happens when you speak about alternative medicine or integrative concepts is you're speaking to a room of people where you have to prove that what you do is something legitimate or something real, or that you're not a quack or you're not crazy. And so I feel like perhaps I'm in good company here. Every talk that has come before has had something that is also in my talk. So I think that we're all resonating in a really similar way. Aha. Those are my parents. That's Marie and Joe. So my parents were high school sweethearts. They met when my mother was about 16 and my dad was about 17. They were two Italian kids from Camden, New Jersey. They got married in the spring of 1964, and I was born on the winter solstice of 1965. And our family would get together every Sunday from years before I was born until probably about 15 years ago. 4 generations, sometimes 3, depending on how long people were living. And we would get together and have a typical Italian picnic, which was a 5-course meal that took about 8 hours. And a lot of laughing, a lot of really good times. Well, on one August afternoon in 1966, my mother was sitting at the pool and she went blind. Unexplainably, just completely lost her sight. For 7 years after that, she had intermittent episodes of tingling, paralysis, blindness, and progressive symptoms that affected her speech, her gait, and her overall equilibrium. You can imagine the way that these symptoms were addressed. It's 1966 to 1973. Spinal taps, rudimentary neurological evaluations, steroids, Librium, Valium, you're crazy, take a sleeping pill. So much fear, so much anxiety, so much unknown. After that, 7 more years, rapid progression followed by complete incapacitation, and she died in her sleep at 37. Here's the point of the story, though. My dad knew long before she had manifested physical symptoms that something wasn't right. The tingling, the paralysis, long before she lost her ability to walk, to feed herself, to talk, he said, she's not Marie anymore. So he might not have known that the myelin sheaths surrounding her nerves were quietly destroying themselves. He had no understanding of what the cruel progression of multiple sclerosis looks like. He had no idea about autoimmune disease. He was a hairdresser. But he knew that Marie wasn't the same. How many people in this room that have some sort of a clinical practice know this space of subclinical pathology? before people actually have quantifiable symptoms. There's something that just isn't right. People who come to you and they say, I've been to everyone. I've been to everyone and no one knows what's wrong with me. They think that I'm crazy. I know something's happening, but if we don't have in our arsenal of testing a way to measure it in the blood, in the lymph, in the tissue, with a tumor, with an MRI, then we say that there's nothing wrong. That is the space of energetic disease, isn't it? That's the time when there's still enough elasticity in the vital force, in the capacity for healing, that healing can actually occur. By the time we get to quantifiable pathology, okay, you've got to cut something out. You've got to do a little radiation. You have to take some medication. That's reality. But in that space, before the disease really, really manifests itself, is the space where we have the capacity for such amazing healing. The signs and symptoms that present themselves can be really subtle, or they can be really obvious. And that's the funny thing, because sometimes people will come and they will say, I have very specific things wrong with me, but if we don't actually have a testing mechanism that charts it, then we say that it doesn't exist. So these subtle symptoms, people who are compassionate, people who are really listening, people who hear with their third ear and see with their third eye, can perceive what's happening. My dad's recognition of my mom's pre-illness state is part of our family narrative. As I grew into adulthood, I always wondered about this. How did he know? What if somebody understood what was happening? Could something have been done? What happens to the mind when the body gets sick? Because what my dad recognized wasn't that she was having some physiological changes. He said she just wasn't herself. She just wasn't Marie. Marie who was hilarious. Marie who would wait until you walked by, and ladies would always wear a slip then. I still wear one now because I was raised by Italian ladies. But you would walk by, my mother would go like this. She would yank somebody's slip down before they could even get by. That was her signature move. And my dad said there were things like that that just started to not be a part of who she was. And we all know this. We say, I don't feel like myself. I'm just not right. So that question about the whole person really got into my craw. So I went to business school. Why not? So I went to business school in the 80s and got the big shoulder pads and everything, and I wound up doing a lot of work around women's health and writing about women's health and wellness, and I kept finding myself at the same question, asking myself, what happens in our minds when we get sick? What happens in our body if our mind gets sick? So in 1992, after a little divergent career into the business world, I signed on to do a PhD in clinical psych research. And like things that are divine happen, right at that moment where I was about to begin, homeopathy fell into my lap. And I've never looked back. Because homeopathy is centralized around these very questions that I had been asking. The first of which is, what is health? So what is health? It's a state of wholeness. It's a state of balance, right? It's the place where we're in alignment with our higher self. You know, we look at the yin and yang symbol and we see an absolute balance. We've got dark and light. We've got the light within the dark. We've got the dark within the light. At that perfect integration of our male and female energy, we have a soul that's in harmony with its higher self, right? We know that in order to have light, we must have dark. We know that in order to have dark, we must have light. We know that we're in health. We actually have the freedom to reach our highest level of potential without impediment, right? So then health becomes a state of pure potential. It becomes the ultimate state of unity. It's a state of harmony. I was so excited when I got Puneet's email that said that unity was the word that he was looking for, because that was exactly the center point of this talk. All right, so if we're going to talk about health, we have to talk about disease, right? We have to ask the question, what is disease? So if health is wholeness and unity, if health is that yin and yang symbol together in perfect balance, then we've got a division here, right? Disease, then, is a separation from our wholeness. It takes our integrated sense of unity, being one, into something that's now two. We've got dissonance. We're divided, distracted, disembodied, disillusioned. We're disconnected from the divine. We move away from the ability to really focus on what our soul's highest purpose is. I mean, really, when we come down to it, we're a soul in a body, right? A body that needs to eat. We're thinking, how long till we get to the snacks? That needs coffee in the morning, or maybe some green tea, right? Or maybe we're just in a body that feels pain. And whenever you're in a body that feels pain, how easy is it to concentrate on what's going on? Have you ever had a toothache? Where is your tongue? The entire time. You can't remove it, right? One of the great teachers of homeopathy, James Tyler Kent, says a man in health is not aware of his parts. Right? If one of your parts is not right, you're thinking about your parts. So by the time we get to disease, whether we have quantifiable pathology or whether we have a state of preclinical diagnosis, once we get into the state of of division, we've got space in between it that's the prime ground for disease or pathology to take place. So this unbalanced self forms, and the disconnection represents our pain. It represents our state of disease. And I think of that as dissonance. We're no longer in harmony, right? This dissonance detracts us from being able to achieve our soul's highest purpose. Okay, so what is healing? Healing then is just a journey back to our wholeness, right? No matter how we get there. It's an attempt to bring us from a state of dis-ease back to our state of unity, back to our real state, to our space of health. And we do this in many ways through resonance. Right? So if we say that disease begins on the energetic level, then the body naturally recognizes this disattunement and attempts to recalibrate it to get it back to equilibrium. And oftentimes this results in symptoms. Yeah? Symptoms are just the body's way of letting us know that something isn't right. They provide a roadmap for us to reach an understanding about what this dis-ease is about. So homeopathy is one of the modalities that recognizes and appreciates the body's ability to heal itself. That sort of magical thing, that spiritual thing that says we have the capacity to bring ourselves back to that space of health. And remember, we can get to a space of health where we're sick, right? Some people will say that it's their cancer or their diagnosis of some seemingly incurable disease that brings them back to a space of health. Why? Because it reminds them of where they're meant to be. So the role of the practitioner then is to recognize the pattern in this disturbance. And in homeopathy, the way we do this is by recognizing that pattern that's matched in a remedy that resonates with the individual to facilitate the fastest, most efficient, and gentlest return to health. But what's been interesting to me through my years of clinical practice is that the resonance, yeah, it happens between the remedy and the person. That's the transfer that we make, the material transfer of energy. But what about the relationship of the practitioner to the client? What about being that person that they can resonate with, that someone can sit with and look at and say, I feel seen? Right? Wasn't it that movie Avatar where they don't say, I love you, they say, I see you? Right? What does that mean? It means that someone can actually just be themselves in whatever space that they're in. And that's the role that the therapeutic relationship can take on to reach a level of resonance where healing can come from. Yeah? So if we take this metaphor and we look at it as unity being the place we want to achieve to represent health, and disease being the other end of the spectrum, yeah, we move from disease and dissonance into a space of resonance to get back to our harmonious state to reach that space of unity once again. Homeopathy is energy medicine. It works on that level of resonance very deeply, and the remedies are meant to match the pattern of resonance within the individual. Okay? So the practitioner becomes the facilitator of this relationship between suffering and substance. That's how I like my spiral to look. So health is really a much larger concept. concept than the inner workings of the biochemical parts, right? Once we get ourselves into reductionistic thinking, we're in big trouble. In fact, we can move to the death spiral. Yeah? Because by the time you get to the place where all you're dealing with is the effect of illness, that quantifiable pathology, you're no longer seeing what happened in the first place. Why is this person so out of their space of health that they're manifesting multiple tumors, myeloma, leukemia, autoimmune disease? Yeah? Okay. So in homeopathy, it's a complete system of medicine. Right? So I'm going to give you homeopathy in 4 minutes or less. Ready? Put on your seatbelts. So first of all, a complete system of medicine. So most of the people who are here speaking today are speaking from their tradition and their complete system of medicine. Shamanism, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, naturopathy, even conventional medicine, right? Because a complete system of medicine assumes that it has a philosophy, it has a diagnostic framework, has traditions, evidence, and therapeutic practice. Okay? Then there are many other adjunct therapies that go along with those that we can pick up in our own usage and apply. Okay, so homeopathy is individualized medicine. In other words, we look at not what you have, but how you have it. Okay? We work with the mental, emotional, and physical representation of the disease or disturbance. So here's how we use homeopathy. There are lots of different ways. The first is we can use it as an adjunct therapy, meaning if someone is using another modality, they're using conventional medicine, they're getting cancer treatment, homeopathy can be quite effective. It's treating the side effects of chemotherapy or radiation. Okay? And that's what I consider to be the entrance of the spiral. Next, we use homeopathy in trauma and acute care. Anybody here ever use arnica? Right? It's like miraculous. Watch that hematoma disappear. So once we get to the place of trauma and acute care, we're working on what we call a small totality, just what's presented in that moment. So trauma care, somebody breaks a bone, we can treat the swelling, inflammation, contusion, can treat the periosteum and the pain that comes from there and facilitate the healing and the bone knitting, okay? Then we get into what I call named disease or pathological prescribing. So here's where you go to your Whole Foods and you say, I have a cough, I'm going to get Chestol, and I'm going to take that. It throws the sink of all the remedies known to affect that at it, and if you're lucky, you're going to get some good relief. Then we get a little bit more specific. We get into the individualization of symptoms, right? What about this symptom is individual to the person? What is the sensation, the location, the concomitant, what goes along with it, what's the modality, what makes it better or worse? This is the point where when you're working with a homeopath, they start asking you all those questions, and you're like, why are you asking me this? So, because you want to get to the most specific understanding of what the suffering is. So you might have a child that presents with an ear infection or a sore throat. So, okay, you have a sore throat. What's your sore throat like? Well, it's on the left side. It came on suddenly. It feels like a fishbone in the throat. The pain extends to the ear when I swallow. I'm chilly, and I hate it when I get a draft of air. That's how specific that we get. That's when we look at individualization of symptoms. That allows us to look at the 4,500 homeopathic remedies that are available and distill it down to maybe the top 3 or 5 that suit that condition. Okay, now we get to the good part. Because when we work at the level of chronic disease, we actually are able to look at the whole of the person, the largest totality that we can perceive, the mental, the emotional, the physical. We can look at the etiology. Had they never been well since a particular event, a particular trauma? Is this an inherited disease? Do they have a miasmatic predisposition to this level of suffering? How does this person express what their suffering is? What's their delusion? You know, you talk to some people and you go, they always think someone's out to get them, right? Some people, many of us, live in our own bubble of our own delusion. That's actually taken into account to understand the deepest level of what happens with a person. What's the net effect on their life? How does it keep them from achieving their soul's highest purpose? And finally, how can we utilize the therapeutic relationship to its deepest extent to really see that person? How can we understand them at that level? If I had $1 for every time one of my clients has said, you know more about me than anyone else, or you know so much, or I've never told anyone else about this. If I had $1 for every time, I would have my own island. I would. But what we do is we work to see this person, who they are, how they are, and completely without judgment. We sit there as a person who has done their own work, hopefully, to be able to sit in the space of someone else's pain, right? To recognize that which is happening to the person in front of us instead of projecting our own pain onto them. We become a compassionate receiver of someone else's pain. And even if someone comes to us and they're at the level where all we can do is palliate, all we can do is listen, at least we know that we've given them some level of care just by being present in that way. So like I said, the interaction between the homeopath and the client is based on that theory of resonance. The homeopath recognizes the emerging disease pattern and then prescribes the homeopathic remedy based on that energetic recognition. Homeopathy reached its stage of implementation around 1805. It's evolved as an elegant system of medicine, looking at acute disease, trauma care, on through to deep chronic conditions and palliative end-of-life care. It's actually had great success in the realm of public health in treating epidemics like cholera, typhoid, scarlet fever, influenza, even Ebola. So this complete system of medicine takes its place along these other modalities, right? But where I feel it shines most brightly is in the places where conventional medicine doesn't actually have a way to treat. If you've got autoimmune disease, what are your options, right? Steroids, shut the immune system down, don't allow it to do what it's meant to do. In areas like depression, true mental illness, right? Where all we can do is suppress the symptoms. A homeopath has the capacity to work with someone at the level when they know that something just isn't right. And I'm really grateful that I can take my place in a room of people like you. And with 20 years or more now of clinical care under my belt and 210 years of homeopathic evidence, to be able to look back and say, well, you know, my dad actually had that gift of knowing when something just wasn't right. And so on Father's Day, that's what I'd like to give back to him, is thanks for that. Thank you all.